Okay, hello everyone. So this is a short video just to discuss about the bug that we were facing in the last class when we were trying to do the drop-down menu for our nav bar. If you remember, this is what we have till now. Okay, and essentially the goal was that there would be a projects drop-down menu, so where you will have project one, project two, and so on and so forth. So we wanted to mimic the behavior that we have for this particular website. That is, you have the logo, and you have the original set of navigation menus. So this is the original set of navigation menus. And where we were working on till we hit the bug is essentially if you hover over one of these different menu options, it will show you the drop-down menu, right? So for us, the goal was to have like a subcategory of projects menu, which will show up when the users are going to hover the cursor over that particular primary projects menu, right? So what we had to this point, so if you look at the CSS file here, we had, so this is the drop-down styling that we were working on, right? So essentially what we had done is we had removed the default display of the drop-down block. So the way we did it is by specifying display equals to none. And we also set the positioning of the parent element, which was essentially this projects menu or this list item. And we wanted to set the drop-down menu, which was essentially the block was going to be a child. So this is basically going to be the child as absolute positioned to the parent, right? So the parent will be relative to whatever is there. And then the block of menu that will show up will essentially going to be absolute to the parent itself. So that's what we wanted to do. And the problem that we faced when we were trying to implement this is like when we applied this hovering style over this parent menu, which is basically our projects, and then we wanted to select a child of that particular parent, which is identified by the class name dropdown, this essentially did not work, right? So essentially, the original code that we wanted to do is we wanted to make the display visible, right, to the users, right? So this is essentially not working, right? So as you can see here, I'm also testing out a new piece of code here where I'm trying to apply the color brown to whatever is happening here, and essentially nothing is happening if you go over the projects, right? So after looking over this a little bit, essentially what I realized is the structure of CSS styling requires this particular menu item to be the parent, and then the block of code, which is identified by this drop down as the child item of the parent. So that is how this positioning relative and positioning absolute will work. That is how when the user hovers over the parent item, this child item will actually be selected, right? So if you remember the selectors discussion, when you write something with a space, then the first item here to the left of the space is the parent, and then the right is any child of that parent, no matter what level it is, right? But after noticing this code is getting a little bit cluttered more and more, right? So you notice here that this is where the list item is for the projects, right? So this piece of code here from line 47 to line 49 is what this is showing up, right? Just this, the writing, not the coloring that is showing up when you kind of hover over it. But you notice here, the mistake that I did was I closed this element, right? However, as discussed based on the logic that we're trying to implement, that this drop-down menu, this whole block till this point is actually a child of projects menu, right? But if I close the block here, then essentially when CSS goes looking for this drop-down menu class, right, which identifies this block, it cannot essentially find it because there is no child to this list item because I have already closed it. So what I need to do, hopefully, in order to fix this, is select this whole drop-down menu code block, which essentially is from here to here, and move it one level up. So that way, now this list item has a child which is this entire unordered list that is identified by this class name called dropdown. Okay, so now if I save this, if I remove this debug code that I had, okay, so hopefully things will show up, which is still not showing. So let's double check this again as to what we did. Okay, so what essentially happened is I forgot to save it, this index.html file. So after saving the index.html file, notice here that we have not done any further changes. So essentially the list item starts here for project primary, and then it ends here. So if I basically minimize this list item, you can see that the entire drop-down menu kind of goes away, and we are looking at the original menu that we essentially have here, right? So now, if we actually implement this, okay, everything else remains the same, but the only piece of code that we actually need to put is the moment when a user hovers over the primary menu, then select the child menu, which is essentially the drop-down menu, and from display equals to none, make display equals to block, right? So if we go back and test this out, so now you can see home, Vite, and then we come to projects, then that kind of shows us our display menu. And then from there, we can go forward. So you can change the width and the height and the padding of this drop-down menu a little bit, okay, in order to make it seem a little bit closer to how things are here as it appears right below it, right? So we can go back to the CSS styling page here, and we can change all of these paddings for the list items, the margin, if you want to put more separations and stuff like that. So let's say if you put 15, right? This is going to change the margin here, the more margin you give for the list items. So you can put different kinds of values and test it out to see how the padding across the y-axis seems. If you want to give more padding across the x-axis, you can give that. So that will give you more padding here and more padding around these points, right? So you can try these things out, but essentially the bug that we were facing was for this parent menu item. I unfortunately had closed the list item instead of adding this drop-down menu, which is supposed to be a child of this parent. I put it outside, right? So the hierarchy, that is the DOM structure problem, essentially got messed up a little bit. So that's why CSS was not able to identify the child node that we are trying to run. Okay, so that is basically the resolution of the bug, and then things will work as intended. And then you can play around with this code a little bit, get your hands used to it, build up some confidence if you're working for the first time. And we will continue working on the responsive navbar design in the next class. Okay, so thank you.